The second I found out my aunt had anything to do with my dad's medical decisions or medical care, I knew his life was in danger immediately. And so I urgently called the hospital. This happened to be the day that he did end up dying, by the way. So in a panic, I called the hospital, who tell me about how he's already scheduled for transplant. To be the donor, not for his own transplant. So they tell me that this has been already scheduled for 3 days now, which, mind you, he's only been in the hospital for 3 days. He was successfully resuscitated and in stable condition, since he didn't even require any blood pressure medications since like 2 hours, maybe for a couple hours after the resuscitation. He needed some vasopressors, but like after that, he was not only stable, he was improving. His condition was still improving. A lot of his conditions were even resolved by the second day. But also by the second day, a woman claiming to be his fiancée, who he didn't even know who she was, and his estranged sister were pushing for organ donation. Considering he had just had a cardiac arrest, he was doing pretty good. Maybe not the best he's ever felt in his whole life, but he was doing pretty good given the circumstances. But these two were new beneficiaries of a brand new version of their will that the estranged sister's lawyers had drafted for him. Only months earlier, they start announcing his death by the second day he's in the hospital. So the same day they start pushing the hospital to just take his organs as an organ donor. That's what they requested, and the hospital obliged, and they had scheduled it exactly when they asked him to schedule it, because the nurse told me on the phone, we've already had this scheduled for like 3 days now. She was basically telling me like there's nothing they could do because they had already scheduled these surgeons' helicopter flight. Well, that sucks for you. Like, you still don't get that doesn't make that okay. But they do it. That's what they do. Within 2 minutes of hanging up the phone, they had declared him dead. Coincidentally, he just happened to die at that exact moment that I called and asked them to postpone the organ donation for at least a couple hours so I can call my lawyer and see what my rights are and what my dad's rights are. There's, this story is full of crazy coincidences like that. Full of it. I cannot even count how many. Some unusual and flat-out offensive behavior that I saw from Jennifer around the time of my dad's death. Jennifer was pretending to be his fiancée. She was already married, still going strong with her husband of many, many years, and still married to him. But she was just calling herself fiancée because she wanted to be the beneficiary of all of his funds, of all of his retirement accounts and everything, and then he suddenly dies right after she becomes beneficiary of essentially everything. After she had allegedly found him not breathing and face down in his bed, she calls 911 to report that, and they come and they successfully resuscitate him, and they get him stabilized within a couple hours. She still thinks of it as a good idea to bring copies of a new version of his will that her and his estranged sister had brought him to go make only months before. So think about it this way. Like, if you had found your partner, it was actually someone you cared about, you find him totally unexpectedly because apparently he was feeling great all day that day. There was nothing that made anyone guess that anything was about to go wrong. Absolutely zero signs or symptoms of anything going wrong happening. And she just suddenly, unexpectedly, out of nowhere, finds him face down in bed without a pulse. And her first thought is, oh, time to break out the last will and testament we just made him. you're not even, why do you even accept that he's dead yet, first of all? And why do you need it at the hospital, second of all? Ma'am. And by the second day he's in the hospital, she starts pushing for organ donation, along with his estranged sister. They're both the new beneficiaries, and they're both pushing for organ donation. As in, they're pushing for him to get his organs removed. His vital organs. Like, not... He would not survive that. He did not survive that. That's what they did, actually. But they were pushing since day 2. And he was in stable condition and improving significantly at that point. And it was only day 2. Like, that's not giving someone enough time to wake up after a cardiac arrest, especially with all the drugs they were drinking, but whatever. So 3 days after he was first admitted to the hospital, which is the day that he ended up dying, that's when I find out about all this, because I just happened to be moving the exact same day that he had been admitted to the hospital. My phone broke while I was moving, and I was so busy with, like, you know, packing up and whatever, that I didn't bother getting another new phone until 3 days later. You know, the day he ended up dying. And so that's when I find out about everything. Well, I mean, not everything, but that's when I find out about his cardiac arrest, and he's in the hospital. That's when I find out that his sister, his estranged sister with a history of abuse, is his guardian. So, and I described that phone call a little bit more in the last video, right before this one. So another thing that I had said on the phone call, besides just requesting for them to postpone the organ donation surgery, I had also requested a phone call from anyone trying to make decisions regarding pulling the plug on my dad. They were both pushing for it pretty equally, so I guess it's not fair to blame just one of them. But his estranged sister and Jennifer, the woman calling herself his fiancée, despite... there's sufficient evidence to I would say more than just assume that she was not his fiancée, and he had never proposed to her. I think I could say it's sufficiently proven that she is not his fiancée, and he never proposed to her or knew who she was after his brain injury, at least. So I left my phone number with the nurse so Jennifer could call me back. I waited all night. She never called me. Oh, until the next morning when he was already dead. After pulling the plug on my dad directly against my wishes. She was as cheerful as ever and sounded so casual. Definitely not mourning. The first and only time I ever spoke with Jennifer directly was the day after my dad died. I had given the hospital my phone number specifically to give her the day before. I had specifically requested to postpone the surgery to take my dad's organs away, therefore ending any chance of survival. I had asked them to please postpone it until I could speak to a lawyer and understand my rights. And after I hung up the phone, he was declared dead 2 minutes later. 2 whole minutes later. I have the phone screenshots of the phone call history to prove that. So I waited all night for her to call me, and I know she had my number. I know that it wasn't like the hospital taking a while to give it to her for a fact, because she was there in the room telling the doctors to not tell me anything as I was giving them my number so that she could contact me. If she had a single ounce of respect in her for my dad, or just like any basic human decency anywhere in her, she would have called me that night. She would have called me before rushing my dad down the hallway. The honor walk was an honor run this time. The very next morning, at like 6 a.m., because I'm on California time, so I guess it was 8 a.m. in Arkansas time. But 6 a.m., like, you know, and that was kind of a rough night to fall asleep. Like, that was rough. And so she calls me first thing in the morning. That's the first thing I have to deal with after such an ordeal. When I'm still like in a state of shock, I hear her cheerful voice sounding more. I've never heard a person sound so cheerful in my life. Like she was at the peak of bubbly, like speaking to me so casually, Like, it sounded like she was going on a brunch date with, like, an old friend. Something super casual. It did not sound like she was talking to the daughter of the guy she just watched die. And that guy whose death she's profiting off of beautifully. She's never had a single ounce of grief. Never. Except for when she found out she was losing money. That's the only time I ever heard her cry. When we were in court. When she thought she was going to lose money for a second. She never cried over my dad. She never cried over his death. Not that I'm aware of. Never. His memorial, if I wasn't holding my phone, I'd be doing quotation marks, because they were throwing a party. And immediately handing away all of his belongings to anyone who wanted it. Immediately. And that wasn't the only party either. There was many series of parties thrown in my dad's property immediately following his death. And she was calling them summer bashes. I just need to find the screenshot that she actually sent to my one sibling who lives in Arkansas. She sent him an invitation to one of them. Like, what? And it was so cheerful. It was like, it was something along the lines of, come and join us for the last summer bash in Rick's house. Something like that, with a lot of emojis. It was so casual. Just dancing on his grave. Like, what? So this is how I know that the caliber of people that we're dealing with in this situation, they're not normal people. They do not experience the same emotions that you and I experience. They don't feel grief. They don't feel empathy. The only thing they ever feel remorse for is themselves and their own suffering. They're different types of people. Their brains and their motivations work in different types of ways. That's what I really hope people can understand. It doesn't matter if they're nice to have a conversation with. It doesn't matter if they can be friendly and even charismatic. It doesn't matter. Look at their motivations. Look at their actions. Who would treat the family of someone they cared about this way? They wouldn't. As in, she didn't care about him. She doesn't care about others in general. She cares about herself. And that has been proven to me time and time again. One more thing, I'm going to try to end it on a positive note. I feel like it's a positive note, because it's easy to misunderstand my motive for, even starting this TikTok and keeping going with it. It might seem concerning to some, but I think that has more to do with me struggling to find the right words a lot of times, or struggling to figure out how to explain something that is inherently so emotional. But the only reason why I find it so important to keep talking about it, even if I have to kind of learn how to speak more eloquently on such difficult subjects as I go, is out of hope. It's not out of negativity. It's out of optimism. I didn't have any hope that things could change, that things could get better, that maybe someday families won't have to experience what I had to experience. It's out of hope for that. Like, if I didn't have any faith that would actually happen, or that may actually happen, I wouldn't bother. Why would I? So that's one of my main driving factors, is not negativity. It's actually positivity. It's the way I see it. It's because things can get better. And I'm just trying to do my part, I guess, to at the very least just raise some awareness. But hopefully also in the end, hopefully I get some real answers and some semblance of justice for my dad, if that's possible. And I believe it is possible. I don't see why not. I just refuse. I refuse to give up. I refuse to accept that that's the world that we live in, where that's okay. So I'm not going to stop. And my dad had his life cut short, and he doesn't have a voice. He had his voice taken. I still have a voice. As long as I can still speak up, I'm going to speak. And I might not always say the right thing, and I might not always say things the right way, but I know all my dad has ever wanted of me is to be confident about what I am saying, whatever it is, and to have the strength and the bravery to like be willing to speak it, even if it's a hard topic to discuss, even if it's something that makes other people uncomfortable. If it's that important to me that I feel like it's weighing on me, like I have to say something on it, if I have the confidence and the courage to say it. I mean, of course, it's always nice, icing on the cake, if I can also say it well, but that's not always the most important thing. Like, I'm willing to risk a little embarrassment here and there if that means, for one, it means another learning experience for me. The important part is speaking up when I know something is wrong and when I witness something that's wrong in front of me. Just try to imagine what I would want other people to do. If I was in the same situation my dad was in, I would want people to speak up. And I feel like if I was in the same situation my dad had been in, I feel like other people's silence when they notice something might be off, but they're not totally sure, so they're scared to ask and they don't want to be nosy. Like, I feel like that level of silence when I'm being abused, I feel like that would sting just as much as the abuse. But maybe that's just me. I don't know. I just try to think of what I would want if I was the one in a position where I couldn't speak up for myself. And that is a philosophy I try to live by, and I always try to speak up, or at least look into things a little bit further just to make sure everyone's safe and everyone's okay. I mean, if it is a misunderstanding, so be it. That's a happy ending to that story and moving on with my life. That's my philosophy. That's how I live my life. I think my dad would be perfectly happy with that. Actually, I know he would. I know that's what he wants for me.